Coming up on episode 94 of the Behind the Back podcast, free agency has begun in the NBA, and we got to talk about some moves the Kings made and what moves remain for the Sacramento Kings, because this is kind of looking weird right now. So we break down all the moves and what's up next. And after that, we pivot to the rest of the league and pick some winners and losers from free agency and what moves surprised us. What moves are we going to be talking about for the next couple seasons because of how drastic they were. So stay tuned for that, guys. With that being said, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben the Jet Retz. Ben, how are you, my brother?
Dude, I'm good. I just I finished up over the weekend making a 48-hour tri-tip that was incredible.
Ooh.
I made it in this thing called the sous vide, SOUSVIDE. Shout out to my parents for the birthday gift. It's awesome. It's like you put this meat in a sealed bag, you put it in the sous vide, and you set a timer. There's a wand on there that keeps the water a certain temperature. So like for me, I set it to 126. Let it go for 48 hours, pulled it out, let it rest, put it on a pan to sear real quick. Dude, phenomenal. It was beautiful. It was the best meat, the best tri-tip I've probably ever had. So
Dude, that's insane.
I'm on cloud nine. I'm in a whole nother world because that tri-tip is absolutely incredible. So
and that
I'm all good.
tri-tip makes, everything else that we're about to talk about that much better, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you got to have good food to help you through the bad times.
So as you guys probably heard in the intro, and as Ben just said there, the bad times we're referring to, maybe it sounds a little bit dramatic, but we're gonna start today's topic with all the free agent frenzy. We're gonna stay close to home, start with Sacramento, and discuss those moves, and then discuss some of the moves that we grabbed our attention throughout these first couple of days of free agency. And for you guys who are your first time listeners, welcome to the Behind the Back podcast. If you guys are interested in the stuff we're talking about or like what we have to say, please give us a like, subscribe, comment on the show, anything you have. We appreciate all the love and support. So let's get down to business. The Sacramento Kings got a point guard, right? They got Dennis Schroeder, and there was a lot of discussion, so it was 3 years, $45 million was the agreed upon deal for him to come from Detroit. And before we get into the Dennis Schroeder thing, let's talk about the other moves. We traded Jonas Valanciunas today with Denver to get for Dario Saric, and we'll explain what that part, because that factored into the Dennis Schroeder signing. And then Jake LaRavia departed and left us for our fiercest rival, the LA Lakers. So that was slightly disappointing.
Cool, Jakey.
Yeah, not cool. Jake the Snake at this point. And then we signed center Drew Eubanks as a potential backup option when we get here. So that's kind of been our free agency so far. And compared to some of these other teams we're about to talk about, it's really not much. And I think this was a weird spot because, this is Scott Perry's first free agency with the Kings. He's had a lot of cleaning up to do. And, coming off of the draft, we're like, okay, he's doing the right things. And now we're here and we're kind of seeing the problems he's presented with. So let's talk a little bit about the Dennis Schroeder addition, because he's the key piece in free agency. We were talking about him or Russell Westbrook for the potential point guard vacancy that we have. So what were your initial thoughts on having Dennis Schroeder here in Sacramento?
I just wanted Russell Westbrook, man. Like that's where I was at. I went on here and said that my hot take was that we would sign Russell Westbrook. They were, reportedly close at times, but ultimately, they went with Dennis Schroeder. I'm not like sitting here thinking Dennis Schroeder is the worst signing ever, because one thing's for sure is Dennis Schroeder knows how to play basketball. He's been in the league a number of years. He actually has made NBA history by signing with the Sacramento Kings as being he's tied with Marco Bellinelli now for the most ever teams played on in the NBA. And this is his 10th team. That's so he's bounced around, right? But it's not really because he can't find like a rhythm in the basketball court or anything like that. It's situationally, he's ended up on some pretty bad teams and also ended up in situations where, it's a rebuild, and now we're looking for a point guard just to kind of get us through until we find our guy. And he's found himself back in the exact same situation here in Sacramento. Dennis Schroeder is a really good basketball player. That's where I'm going to lead off here now. And I will say that I think in now the 3 years, it's a 3-year deal. The 3 years that we're going to have him, at least the 2 years, I think we're going to grow to enjoy watching him play basketball. I think it's going to feel like we have a point guard again, which it didn't feel like for the last 30 games of the season last year. So from that standpoint, it's nice. It's nice to know we have somebody who can facilitate, right?
Exactly.
But you look at his age, and I think where a lot of fans are kind of hung up on the amount of years this contract, a 3-year, 45. The money is one thing. Like, Kings fans will understand this, and Kings media, the organization, everyone's in Sacramento is going to understand. You have to overpay for any free agent, whether they're good or bad, to be here in Sacramento. You pay the California tax, you're a California team, so therefore you're going to have to pay more because guys are going to want more, knowing they have to pay more tax. And on top of that, you're the crappiest California team in California. So, and you've been that way for a number of years. So it's a reality you've got to face. You've got to overpay for these free agents. So the money thing, $15 million a year for Dennis Schroeder, doesn't really bother me that much. The 3 years, I'm a little bothered by that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, like you said, 3 years. So when we reference his age, he's going to be 32 in September. So he'll be 34, turning 35 by the end of the contract if he's here the whole time. And like you said, making history. This is he's one of only 8 players ever to be on 10 or more teams throughout a point in their career. So like you said, he's up there with his ability to kind of fit into whatever system he's brought into. I think that's the one thing that you get with a journeyman like him is he's consistent. He's put up consistent numbers his whole career. I mean, he had the whole thing during the trade deadline where he was on 3 different teams in from the span of 24, 48 hours, where he was like Golden State and then another team. And then before he ended up in Detroit,
it was Brooklyn, Golden State.
There
Detroit.
You go. Yeah. So then he ended up in Detroit for the playoff run. And obviously they lost to the Knicks, but he was a big part of that. And I think there was talks that Detroit fans liked him over there and that they kind of wanted to keep him around. But obviously find a better opportunity in Sacramento, I guess, for more playing time, right? Like this, he came here knowing that he's going to get the starting job here. He's scrappy and he knows how to facilitate, and that's going to be important. But he is smaller and older. And I was kind of okay with whether it was Russ or him. I know you were really hoping for the Russ train just for the sake of, having Russell Westbrook alongside this cast that we have here might have just been, for the name of it all, more fun, right? Schroeder seems kind of like the safe pick. But now when we assess kind of the rest of the roster, actually, before I do that, let's talk about a little bit more about how we made this happen. So the Jonas Valanciunas trade, where we traded for Dario Saric, basically what we did with Denver was Denver took on Jonas's contract, was making $10 million, and we took on Dario's contract and he was making $5 million. So that $5 million that we saved from switching those players, because it was a straight up trade, nothing else was involved. That opened up the books enough for us to pay Dennis slightly over the mid-level tax exception that most teams could have offered him, which is around $14 million. So we got to go a little bit higher, and that was kind of the story of how we were able to bring him here. But there was more news circulating this particular transaction that's still technically not out of the woods yet. There was discussion about a sign and trade to make this move happen, and a sign and trade involving Malik Monk. And that was when that report came out. I thought that was a little weird. The fact that, for Dennis Schroeder, we're trading Malik Monk, and if we're doing a sign and trade, is Dennis really the main piece we're bringing back from this deal for Malik Monk? And if you look at just the pure raw numbers, you can make an argument for, this could be semi-fair if they moved a couple things around. But that was the part I didn't like about this move, is the fact that now this turns into a completely different conversation. That's not about us signing Dennis Schroeder. It's about what our future is at the guard position. So let's talk about, and I want your take on this, our guards. So when we look at our roster as it's currently constructed, point guard, Dennis Schroeder. Okay, shooting guard. We got plenty. We got Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, Keon Ellis, Devin Carter, Terrence Davis, and Nick Clifford by definition
Yeah,
would
he's
be
the two
labeled as
three.
a shooting guard if he were to start. So that's 5 dudes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with this whole Malik thing, now we kind of have to look at this the way this roster is constructed right now, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have what is it like eight or nine, you know, guard like players. One
Mm-hmm.
true forward. I mean, if we count DeMar too, so DeMar and Keegan, 2 forwards, and then Domas, Reynaud, and Eubanks now at the center position. I don't know how I feel about this group, and the talks about getting rid of Malik Monk or trading Malik Monk has come with the reports that there's literally no market for him.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. Do you think trading Malik Monk would be the right move? Do you think that's what we have to do at this point, what we need? Or, do all these reports kind of annoy you with just kind of how these first couple of days have gone?
If there's really no market out there, I wouldn't just want to give up Malik Monk for nothing, right? Like that's kind of where my head's at. Is if there's really no market out there and you're at that point, you're essentially going to get lowball offers from teams who are like, well, we really do want Malik. We're not going to say we do, but because, there's no market out there, we're going to lowball the crap out of you. I'm not, I wouldn't be willing to move on from Malik like that.
Mm-hmm.
Malik means a lot to the city of Sacramento. He means a lot to, at least to the ownership group, at least going into, last year. Now, obviously, with Scott Perry, his history is completely revamping teams. And I mean, he took the New York Knicks, and in 3 years, not a single player from 3 years prior was left on that team. So this is kind of what Scott Perry does. So I wasn't really annoyed by it, knowing his history, and kind of knowing this is something that, we should probably brace for. I was annoyed by the fact there's, reportedly no market from Malik Monk. And to me, that bugs me because we see him night in and night out put, all out effort into games. And, for the time that he was 6 man in Sacramento, he was a baller. But, unfortunately, circumstances reared and he was thrust into a starting point guard position, filling massive shoes that we didn't know were as massive as they were prior to the departure. And that's when I think the value started to really plummet. And you saw, you get this sense now from an outside perspective. You see, well, he really can't run an offense like that. He really can't do this thing or that thing. He is worth that contract that Sacramento gave him, and we probably wouldn't offer him anything more than that. So you can't say that it's a extremely valuable contract necessarily. He's very much a 6 man, and at this point, there are so many really good 6 men. It's hard to to find a deep market for 6 men in the league right now.
Yeah, and I think a good point to that is going to be Malik probably, and it sucks because we're talking about Malik like you mentioned, like he wasn't valuable. Like I get people are throwing his name around as if it's just that easy, and that his production's just easily replaceable. And I think it's a little unfair. It disrespects the effort that he's put in, but I do also think it's a case of people still believe no matter how good Sacramento ends up being at any point, that we're still Sacramento, and that every player that's in Sacramento instantly loses value because if you're on the Kings, you're on the Kings for a reason. So I think it's one of those things where the Kings themselves they're just not a luxury team, and any other team can say, "Oh, if we're making a deal with you, we're going to be the ones getting the better end of the deal, and you don't have much say about it because you're Sacramento." And it sucks. And I agree that I don't think it's the right move to just sacrifice Malik just for the sake of no matter how it seems right now. Malik seems like the kind of guy who would just ball anyway, especially if Doug's just in his corner backing him up consistently. I think that Malik is cool with all the outside noise.
Agreed.
I just think that, but I also think that we need to figure something out. I guess that's the point. Do we really need to figure something out now because our hands are kind of tied. Like, this may be, with the exception of like one or two moves, because we don't know what's going to happen with Trey Lyles. We haven't heard anything about him actually, but he's under the bird rights, so we can technically go over the cap without. We can sign him and go over the cap without it penalizing us. So that's another wrinkle that is still out there that I'm interested to see what happens there. But for Malik, it's tough because we can't trade Malik. We can't trade Zach. We could probably trade DeMar, but his market won't be more robust until he seems like the kind of midseason transaction you would make on a contending team that needs mid-range scoring or that need to score. So we run into this issue where, okay, now we have this rookie too in Neat Clifford that we're trying to find minutes for. And even if we run him at the 3 alongside Zach or whoever, then that still compromises our side. And we're just going to have the same issues we had last year where we were a small team, where we were small. And even if he's athletic to make up for it, we're still not the biggest, most physical team. So I just think we're stuck in this limbo where Scott's going to have to spend the next couple years revamping this roster. And we're just going to have to kind of sit there and take it until it happens and hope that the guys we have can be competitive on a nightly basis. But, to expect this team, and I hate that how negative this sounds, to expect this team to make a playoff run next year it's very slim. And I don't want to, for the fans who love the Kings and believe in this team, I believe in them. And on a night to night basis, I will root as hard as I possibly can for our team. But it's hard to say, especially with the way a lot of these other teams have the moves that have been made this offseason. It's kind of hard to see everyone around us getting better and us just kind of staying in the same spot while we're trying to find a way out. So it's been, these first couple of days have just kind of been a nice slap to the face, for lack of a better word.
No, and that's what it feels like. But it also, for me, it does kind of open my eyes as to seeing how much of a process a true rebuild can be. And, that's not to say that the Kings are going to go through a full rebuild. I don't believe they will. I don't think under Vivek Ranadive they will ever go through a full and honest rebuild. And in a lot of ways, I have a lot of issues with that. But that aside, we're seeing the early effects of Scott Perry's presence, being felt. And he made some really good draft decisions. I think the draft was an exceptional way to kick off his time here in Sacramento. And obviously this free agency was always going to be a touchy thing because you didn't know how it was going to shake down. You wanted, especially with the LaRavia situation, like, of course, being a part of that De'Aaron Fox trade, you very much so wanted, or in that time frame rather, you wanted him to stick around here in Sacramento, but you knew you were handicapped as Sacramento as to how much you could pay him. And so all it took was for one team to value him, not even as much as the Kings do, but to value him enough to throw a number that we can't hit at him. And that's,
but that's the thing. Sorry to interrupt. It was only $1 million more. He signed for $6 million and the max we could have offered him was $5 million.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Because the Lakers probably didn't want him as bad as we did. That's the point I'm making is like, there was such a low bar for him that was set because he could only get this much money, no matter if we thought he was the freaking MVP of the NBA, right? Like, we could only pay him $5 million.
Yep.
Any team that thinks he's good enough, even as a reserve player, not to say he'll be a reserve, I think he'll be a rotational piece on the Lakers, but even if they thought he was a reserve player, $6 million, get him over here. They can't do crap about it.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was LA sucks. But, with free agency and how all this is shaken down, you're seeing the early effects of a general manager who wants to build this team his way. And his way doesn't necessarily envision Malik Monk. I think a lot of the reason why we've heard rumors of him being involved in trade talks in any way, shape, or form, and a lot, any of the conversations around Malik Monk, the reason those are out there is because I don't think he's a part of this long-term plan. And I'm curious to see who actually is a part of the long-term plan, especially with the Kings picking up the player option on Keon. It makes me wonder. It's like, well, you're asking a guy to play now on what is probably not just the most valuable contract in the NBA, but probably the most ridiculous contract in the NBA from a standpoint of what he brings to the Kings. That guy's he's making what, $2 million this year? Like, yep. It is nothing. It's bare bones when he could have been getting a real contract. but you have him play on his player option. Now it draws questions as to, is he a part of the Kings' future moving forward? Or is this kind of like a trial year for Scott? And that's what I'm kind of wondering. That's what I'm kind of wondering at this point in the free agency conversations in this offseason that we're a part of, is it feels like the Kings are running it back in a lot of ways with a few minor changes, right? And I think, not that that's a right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, it's a thing that you do when you're trying to get a feel for the direction you want to go. And I'm not saying Scott doesn't have a direction. He probably has a direction, but it's going to tell him a lot based on what he sees from this season. And I think that's a lot of the reason why you see, the Sacramento Kings not trying to make a splash move to stay, the 8th best team. Instead, they're okay being like the 10th or 13th best team, because reality is that's probably where they're going to be, considering how much better the West has gotten.
Right. And listen, at this point, I think just taking your losses, I wouldn't say tanking, because that's not what the Kings are doing. I don't think there's no signs that they're tanking, but I think they're completely okay with whatever happens. If for some reason this team pops off together and all of a sudden, we're in the playoff conversation, cool, great. Like, we can maneuver off of that. But if, we're hovering around the play-in, or we end up with, the 11th or 12th best record, there's still a fair opportunity that we end up with a solid draft pick at that point. So then you can build that way too, and then it's just another year. I think this year, and we talked about it because of all the injuries and the way the East is wide open and things like that, everyone in both conferences have really just kind of moved in a way where some teams, like half the league, it's like, oh, this is a gap year, we're just going to see what happens, run with some of these rosters, make a little tweak here and there, get our books cleaned up and hope for the best, while other teams are going all in and saying, this is our chance now, let's go ahead and do what we can. And
yeah,
for the Kings, I think we're not in this in between, because number one, we are under the luxury tax, which is great. That's where we want to be. We would have been over with the roster we had last year had that all stayed the same this year. So it would have been interesting how that would have happened. But yeah, this sucks too, because this all stems from the fact that Monty McNair was allowed to trade De'Aaron Fox. And I think, had Scott Perry inherited a team that had De'Aaron Fox before Levine, number one, I don't think he would have made that trade without much better compensation, right? And I think it's an even tougher pill to swallow, knowing that we can't be mad at Scott, because he inherited this position that's really hard to get out of. So we got to give him some grace. We got to give him some time. And I think that's the thing that Kings fans are going to have to, accept this year, is this is going to be the year of patience. And we're not going to, it's going to feel like your favorite, show where all of your favorite characters right now are going to eventually die off and new characters are going to come in. And it's going to be an interesting experience, but I don't know what to expect. And I also I don't know how they're going to spread these minutes around. And that's the part that concerns me, of like, how you're going to run certain lineups and who's going to be the odd man out. And like, are we going to stunt the growth of these young guys in order to just continue the status quo of the older players that we have on the roster? So it's a weird dance that both Doug and Scott really have to navigate these next couple months.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's enough of the Kings. We don't want to get too depressing with them. I think there's still a lot to be done. I know it's not the most, encouraging or sexy offseason for Sacramento, but this is going to be the story for the Kings the next, 5 to 6 months, is who's really this is going to be a tryout year. Like, who's going to be on the roster, who fits Scott Perry's vision.
Exactly.
And if they don't, how can we get those who do fit his vision into the building? And that's going to be an interesting dynamic. So I think, this year, instead of me, because you and I, as Kings fans, as dedicated, loyal Kings fans, we take this stuff personally. We take every loss as if, just a gut punch, right? So I think this year I'm going to mentally prepare, and just whatever happens, I'm just going to be along for the ride, part of the process type of thing. Trust the process, whatever it is. Trust the Perry. I need to trust Scott and hope that, he can lead us into the new era of Sacramento. But that's just, we're in a position where it's going to take time and we have to be patient. So
trust the Perry. Is that the best you got?
Right now. That's the best thing I could do.
No, that was good. I like that. I haven't heard that used around here. But yeah, this is gonna be a wild year. I will continue to be my crash out self every time they lose a game. So I'll be crashing out probably a good 40 plus times this year. But it very much so is a trial year. I mean, this is the year where Scott gets to know his team a little bit deeper, and the big decisions will come. So I'm curious to see what kind of moves are available and potentially out there for the Kings to do at the trade deadline.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to definitely keep an eye on, especially if Giannis wants to come to Sacramento. I know he's always shown interest in coming to Sac, right? But there are names out there for sure that and especially on a weird year like this, where teams take some risks because they believe it's a gap year and they've got a shot. They might be willing to say, we need a Zach LaVine style player
Mm-hmm.
or caliber player, right? So you never really know. It'll be interesting for sure.
All it takes is one injury, and one of our guys are going to be the hottest names on the market. So it's like that's another thing for Kings fans to have solace in, is like our guys are valuable, just not right now because everyone already kind of has what they're looking for. And I think it's when we go through the season and our guys ball out because they are ballers and they're going to put up good numbers, they're going to see the numbers. Teams are going to want that. One of the key players in this NBA season goes down. Oh, crap. We need a scorer. Zach LaVine, come on over. Oh, we need a veteran presence. DeMar, let's go. Like, oh, we need a guard who can do a little bit of everything. Okay, go, Malik. Affordable contract. Like, we got ways to maneuver, just not right now. And I think, let me ask you about the one potential move that's been discussed these past couple of days.
Mm.
And that's been the Kings potentially going after restricted free agent Jonathan Kuminga. What do you think about? And apparently, if there are discussions around it, it would be including Malik Monk in this discussion. So let's assume Malik Monk, and we can talk about whoever the second guy is later. But Malik Monk for Kuminga. Do you think Kuminga would be a fit on this roster?
I do, yeah. I really like the idea of Jonathan Kuminga on this team. I've thought that now for the last 2 years, a little over 2 years, I think he's been severely, misused and underutilized out in Golden State, and it doesn't really piss me off because he's in Golden State. But from the standpoint of like what he could be on our team, I'm like, get him the hell out of there, right? Like, this kid showed what he's got, and more than capable. And obviously he doesn't really fit the style of player that Steve Kerr was going for, which is what a lot of reports were, right, why he never saw the court as much. But to see him kind of grow throughout the playoffs and get some of that time at the very end there on their playoff run. And I mean, he was cooking, dude. He was starting to really figure his game out again. It gave me every reason and indication that to believe that he's still a very good player. Like, he has everything it takes to not just be what he is right now, but be even better. He just needs to be in the right situation. So I would be curious and excited about an addition of Jonathan Kuminga on the Kings. And even if that did take Malik Monk, I would be willing to do it.
Right. I think when we talk about one of the goals for this team is to get younger and more athletic, and he fits those boxes in spades. And I think, like you said, there was flashes, especially last year, especially in the playoffs, where you could see the number one scorer archetype there in Kuminga. And I didn't really believe in him when he came out, just because the Warriors were mishandling him so poorly, like you said. It's not a system that's meant for that kind of talent to grow. And I do think that in Sacramento, we have a lot of scorers, sure, but I do think he would be given the opportunity, especially because I think we're starting to get at a point, and we're going to see next year with Keegan Murray, where Keegan's role is kind of defined now as he might be just a perennial 3-and-D guy who is rock solid and consistent on both sides of the ball for us. But he won't. I don't think he'll ever be that number one scoring option type of guy. We kind of need a more alpha style player, a young guy who can really just say, hey, I'm going to take over this team and be the number one scorer and take all the shots that are important. And I think Kuminga would fit that role. He has that willingness and aggressiveness. And I think he shows that he can lock in on both sides of the ball and utilize his physical gifts too. So I think if Doug Christie got a hold of that, I think he could mold him into something special. And that would provide, especially if we're giving up Malik for him, he would make us bigger, more versatile, on both sides of the ball. So it would definitely be interesting. And it would have to happen in a sign and trade, meaning we're going to be committing to a long-term deal with
Yep.
Kuminga, which again then bears the question of what do we think about Keegan? Is that going to be the move in the future? Those are the questions that open up. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I saw those reports and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm a little bit more interested now than I was in the past about a guy like Kuminga. So okay, that's cool. So let's talk about the rest of the league. We have a few winners and a couple losers here that we want to talk about from around the NBA, because a lot has happened, and because the Kings aren't going to be as good as we wanted to, we've been paying a lot more attention to everybody else around us. So so let's start with you, Ben, because there's a lot of interesting ones we're going to get into here with some of these teams making some of the moves that they did. But what's the first team, what's the first move you kind of want to start with, or in terms of the winner category?
In terms of the winner category, it's going to be the team that I believe was the biggest winner of not just free agency, but really the offseason so far, and that's the Houston Rockets. When you look at obviously trading for Kate and Kevin Durant, stealing Dorian Finney-Smith from the Lakers, which is honestly an automatic W from me because he stole from the Lakers. The way they were able to extend Jabari Smith Jr., which also, from a Kings fan's perspective and a Kings organization, sets the market for Keegan Murray.
Agreed.
They've made some really solid moves in this offseason, and this is a team that was, number two seed in the Western Conference last year with, really more room to grow in a lot of ways than the other way. And you were like, wow, this team has got a lot of potential. They just need like a one, number one option. They need their guy. They need their leader, their guy that they can turn to. And picking up Kevin Durant was like the perfect spot for them. And now, the only question that I have is how balanced the roster is, not from a perspective of like, do they have defense and offense and that. I mean, how balanced are their minutes going to be? Because they've got guys up and down the roster. I'm going to be curious to see how Ume is able to kind of balance that. But ultimately, they're my number one winner.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that. I mean, again, with KD, they got Capella too, and then they're in a spot too. They restructured Fred VanVleet's deal, so now he's making less. And that's, again, they were able to just adjust everything to build this team that's now stacked from head to toe. And I think, if we want to talk about, teams that can go up against OKC, I think it has to be in the conversation that Houston's probably the first, if not second, most competitive team. And we'll talk about another winner that, will give OKC a fight here. But I think that and the Rockets are in a position where they can still make moves. They have so much young talent on that roster. They can flip for future assets to prepare for life without Kevin Durant once he officially retires, if he stays there the rest of his career, right? So, you can trade a Cam Whitmore now if you're not, there's going to be teams that would buy on that guy. Like I would take a Cam Whitmore, and you get to see what Reed Shepherd looks like. You spent the 3rd overall pick on him last year. So this is for the Rockets. They're in a position where they can play around with a lot of these guys. Maybe Amen Thompson takes that leap and turns into like another one of those guys who can be a top 20 player, really finds himself alongside a guy like Kevin Durant too. So it's going to be, I love what Houston has done. I think they're huge winners. And I think like they're set up for injuries. They're set up for, a deep playoff run. And they were a Kevin Durant away from beating the Warriors last season. I think he would have made that level of a difference. So I think that Houston took probably the biggest jump out of any team in the offseason in terms of free agent additions and building out a roster to compete.
A little bit of a side note here. So obviously involved in the Kevin Durant trade was, Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. Did you see the video of Dylan Brooks getting crossed up at just a random gym by a random dude getting crossed up and then getting locked up? Like it was so funny to me.
Oh my gosh.
I was laughing so hard.
Yeah, and that's what he gets. You attract that level of attention, and we talked about this last time. This is I think it was a good trade for both parties. I think Phoenix got in a spot where they were able to get out of Durant and not have to pay him anything, and then still get something back in return. But yeah, Dylan Brooks, he's gonna be, I don't. He'll have a role for the rest of his career, but how long that career goes will be interesting to see for him, because he has the type of game that declines very fast with age. So yeah, that was funny. I didn't see that video, so I gotta check that out. I think that'd be funny. All right, so let's do another winner. I have one in mind here. And it involved, getting rid of Jonas. So, we got to talk about the Denver Nuggets, because I think I have them as a huge winner. And I think people are kind of people are saying, "Oh, why are they getting excited?" And we'll talk about some of these moves here, right? So the main move that happened, Michael Porter Jr. gets traded for Cam Johnson, and so they basically do a swap of those guys. So you get Cam Johnson, they bring back Bruce Brown, and Tim Hardaway Jr. signs, and then they trade for Valanciunas and basically get rid of Zaric, who never played for them. So all of a sudden, what was the biggest issue when you watched Denver take OKC to 7? What was the biggest issue? It wasn't the starters, it was everyone else behind them. The fact that they only had 7 dudes that they could run at any given time. So all of a sudden you add 3 bench players and a starter to replace Porter, who arguably fits your system better than Michael Porter did at a more complete level. It's hard not to see the Nuggets as a winner, because you just stack this roster around Jokic with veterans who can play minutes that you desperately needed that you didn't have guys to play last year. And you wonder if, like, this roster went up against OKC, would it, what the series would have looked like going into it. So I think, you still get a healthy Jokic, you still got Jamal and AG, and then you get to put your new pieces around them. I think they got a true rotation now. So it's hard not to view Denver as a winner.
That's all I've been able to think about is what if this roster was against OKC? Because to be honest with you, I don't think that goes 7, and I don't think the winner is OKC. Denver has done an exceptional job at, bolstering their roster, and that 1-for-1 swap of Cam and Michael Porter Jr. And I call it a 1-for-1 because when you look at their stats, identical, like seriously identical, but the money is so different. Like Michael Porter is worth a lot more than Cam, so Cam, automatically a W there for Denver being able to shed some of that money, right? And then when you look at the availability, I mean, when Michael Porter Jr.'s shoulder isn't acting up or his back isn't acting up, I think, in a one-on-one, or if I had to take one over the other, I'm probably taking Michael Porter Jr. But from an availability standpoint, obviously Cam had that ankle injury last year, and I don't know if there was any others, but I know he's had some things. Mm-hmm. He's still exceptionally, way more available and healthy at any given point than Michael Porter seems to be. And so from that standpoint, you have that reliability and that sustainability for an 82 game season. And if it's not, a full 82, it's okay, because it's probably not going to be, half the games like some of Michael's seasons have been. So I really like that swap. I thought that was a massive W for Denver. It had me completely questioning all of the moves that Brooklyn has made this offseason. But, I can't get too far outside of the Kings realm anyway. So, I love Denver's team. I think they're, in my opinion, they are absolutely in the top 5 conversation for contention right now. I think there's an argument to be had for them being a top 3 contender.
I think they're top 3 in the West for sure. And probably, I mean, it's tough to, it's easy to say.
It's a hard one.
Yeah, I'd say the top 3 in the West are probably the top 3 in the league right now, because given the state of the East. So it is, the Nuggets did, I think they did a lot of the right things in this free agency. And people were like, oh, well, they didn't get a big star. They have Nikola Jokic. He's the best player on the planet. Shut up with, just surround him with players and he's going to be good. So I think, I just think that, and I think Cam Johnson is a better fit because he's a much better off the ball mover. He's a more willing defender. Michael Porter Jr. with his size is a much better offensive rebounder when he wants to be, but you won't ever question that effort with Cam Johnson. And I think that's going to be the part where he'll be moving a lot more. And I think he's a much more natural pairing with Jokic than Michael Porter was. So I think that for those style of play that Denver Nuggets want to play, they filled them in with a lot of players who can supply good minutes. And the biggest one that they struggled with last year was backup center, and Jonas is going to take care of that no problem. So, you're asking 10, 12, 15 minutes of Jonas Valanciunas. So someone has to deal with Jokic the whole time, and then Jonas comes in and bullies them afterwards. Yeah, Denver's going to be tough to stop next year. They're going to wear teams down with how physical they can be.
Dude,
So
we gave the NBA like a baby preview to what Denver's going to be this year with that
that's
backup
true.
center, starting center. You know what I mean? Like,
That's true.
and we saw it at times, even in the same. We saw a lineup on the floor at one point, at multiple times actually, but with Sabonis and Jonas Valanciunas. And we saw at times how dominant that can be, having two big bodies out there like that. I don't think Denver's going to do that, but what my point is like
They
having
could.
two guys, they absolutely could, but having two guys that at any given point you've got to give all your strength and muscle into, it wears on you. And not just, in a regular season game, when you hit the playoffs and you've got to see these guys at least 4 times in a span of 2 weeks, good luck. That's all I've got to say about that. So let's move on to our last winner here. We've got the Atlanta Hawks. And Atlanta has made some really nice moves. And they're in a position in the Eastern Conference where they're looking around the room and going, wow, there's a lot of teams viewing this year as a gap year. I think now might be a time to hold on to Trae Young and try to run this thing back one more time and see what the best, team we can assemble here would be. And so obviously the Atlanta Hawks they traded the number 22 pick for Kristaps Porzingis, which was a really great move. If they get first year in Boston Porzingis, awesome. If they get second year in Boston Porzingis, they're a playoff team, but I don't know if they're the level of an elite caliber team. They added a lethal shooter in Luke Kennard, and they bolstered their defense by adding Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which I think that was, those two additions, I would argue, are equally as good as the Porzingis pickup, because you were able to get shooting next to Trae Young, which you've struggled to do for a number of years. You're able to get defense to kind of hide Trae Young's, lack of defense. Obviously, Dyson Daniels does enough of that, but having another guy in there who is awesome on defense like that, I think is just going to help them. And they're absolutely set up to go on a run this season. And, I think this will be a really good test to see if Trae Young is actually that superstar that people want to say he is. He's getting paid the money to do it, but the results and the stats and obviously the winning or lack thereof has been kind of questioning whether he's actually a superstar caliber player. So this is probably the best test in the Trae Young Atlanta era that we'll have.
I think they really set themselves up very much how Indiana did. You have a ball dominant point guard who can make his teammates better and be the main facilitator. Only obviously Trae Young is a much better scorer. But yeah, these moves that were made were terrific. And not to mention, Kristaps doesn't even have to play half the season, and they still have enough size to contend with anybody. And you still have Okongwu, Jalen Johnson's coming back. You have Reese Shea and Dyson Daniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You have 5 guys who you could run on the floor at the same time. And that's just an all defensive problem for anybody. I think they offer enough switchability at literally all 5 positions now. And now they have shooters around Trae. I just think in the East, they position themselves as well as anybody else. They definitely took the biggest jump.
Yeah.
And if Kristaps hits, him and Trae Young are going to be an unstoppable duo on the offensive side of the ball. There's going to be so many ways that Atlanta's going to be able to attack teams. So I love what the Hawks are doing. I think they've been just like in the Eastern Conference, they were the team that improved the most. So I'm really excited to see what they have next year. And again, they're another team that if guys stay healthy, because they were ravaged by injuries this year, if guys stay healthy, they're going to be a really tough team to stop. So I'm definitely excited for that. So let's talk about our losers. There's been a lot of interesting discussions around some of the teams we're going to talk about. I don't know if you want to go for the big fish right away. What are you feeling for your first loser?
I'm going to let you decide on the first loser, actually.
Okay. So I don't know if this team is a loser so much as this player. And I want to start with Damian Lillard and the Bucks. I think that's the most interesting conversation to go to here. Um, Obviously, the drama surrounding the Bucks is that they waived Damian Lillard, and I will let you explain kind of how they accomplished this. But they have waived Damian Lillard in order to acquire Miles Turner from Indiana, and this kind of surprised everybody, caught everybody off guard. Um, there was reports by Chris Haynes, who's super close to Dame, that Giannis was upset about it, but then there was other reports that saying Giannis was in on the whole thing, on getting the Turner trade happening. So you want to discuss, number one, your take on the Bucks handling of the Lillard situation and how they're accomplishing paying Miles Turner 107 million through 4 years. That's a lot of money. So how are they making this happen?
So this wave and stretch is actually the first time I've seen the wave and stretch used, at least to this caliber, and this is the
Same.
largest wave and stretch. I think they call it a provision that's ever been exercised in the NBA. So what is the wave and stretch? Well, the wave and stretch allows teams to stretch a contract by double the length plus 1 year. So Dame had 2 years, $113 million left on his deal. So they doubled the length and added a year. The payout would be $113 million spread over now 5 years. So that makes it $22.5 million a season for the next 5 years. They did this, obviously, like you said, so that they could give Miles Turner a 4-year, $107 million deal. Here's the part that I'm shocked about, okay? 107 through 4 years for Miles Turner doesn't sound that bad. You know, that's 26.75 a year. Not a
Mm-hmm.
bad deal at all. I'm like, okay, that's cool. But if you take the what's considered dead cap money now with the Dame contract, because he's not a part of the team, so it falls into a category of dead cap space, or dead cap money. If you take his dead cap money, the 22.5, and add it to Miles Turner's deal, because this whole thing was done for Miles Turner, that would mean, Marcos, that Milwaukee is spending $50 million for Miles Turner.
Right.
That's
And yeah,
wild.
that's insane. And I this screams desperation.
Yeah.
With all the talks of, is Giannis staying or is he going, or oh, he's waiting on the roster construction or waiting to see what happens. They started by signing Bobby Portis, who's him and Giannis are great friends and good working relationship together. And then we hear about the Dame thing, and then Brooke Lopez goes to the Clippers. And so you lose guys, you're losing pieces of this team that allowed you to be the player that you were. Miles Turner for Brooke Lopez is a pretty even replacement at this point of their careers. They're going to be able to bring similar things. But just like I understand not wanting to lose Giannis, and they really kind of don't have any other choice. This was the main route that they could go without paying Dame. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
listen, he's 35 years old and he just tore his Achilles. Like, it's cold. It's a little bit, rough. This is the rough part of the business. But he's still getting that money, Damian is. And, if anything, this is a win for Damian because he gets to pick his next team now. He gets to
Yep.
do whatever he needs to do. He gets to go to a contender, which is something he's been longing for. He could go to Miami. He really wanted to go there. Like, it
That's my guess is Miami.
yeah, it opens up options for him, right? So now you got teams calling off the hook for him because they can pay for him now if they wanted to. So that whole piece aside, when we look at the Bucks roster in general, it's a little tough. It's not that great outside of Miles, Giannis, and Bobby. You still have Connaughton. I don't really even know, because after they're going through different pieces and moves now. You have Gary Trent. Like, it's not that inspiring outside of Giannis, is what I'm trying to say, even with the Miles Turner addition.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bucks don't really have the best future assets to use either. Their best asset is Giannis. And the question is, how loyal do you stay to Giannis, or how loyal does he stay to them? And do we see a Luka style trade in the trade deadline? And I think the whole looming Giannis thing was a lot of the reasons we saw a lot of teams stand pat this offseason. Like, you could have saw Miami make a move for the Kevin Durant trade. Same with San Antonio. But I do think there's teams that are waiting out this Giannis thing to see if he's there long term or not. Because if there's even a shot that Giannis is available, the bidding war that's going to go on for him is going to be insane.
Oh.
And Milwaukee will be able to reset. Like, that's not the issue. But it's like, you have Giannis. So why would you want to have to get rid of him at any point? So I think this is the Bucks' last-ditch effort to try and figure something out, to try and move some money around, try and get Giannis to make him happy. And in the East, maybe this team can be a non-play-in team because you have Giannis. But if Miles Turner misses any time, Bobby Portis is out for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
How good is this team really, and how good can Giannis carry this? How long can he carry this team for?
I'm just, I lost a lot of respect for that organization when this whole move went down, because, it's one thing, Marcos, when like you've got one of the best players in the world for as long as you have, and say you didn't win a championship. It's one thing to make a last ditch effort to try and keep him around, to try and persuade, X, Y, or Z, right? They won a chip, which I get, like, one isn't enough. We want more. I get that. Great. But you're going to get a damn good return at any point by trading Giannis Antetokounmpo. And you wouldn't have to jeopardize 5 years of your organization's cap money by making some last-ditch effort to try and get just good enough to make Giannis happy enough to want to stay. And now I'm stuck with, like, for me, the way I'm seeing this play out, this feels like the predecessor to a Giannis wanting out of Milwaukee. Like, this feels like it feels like we're going to be sitting here in a year talking about how last year, on in July they did that whole wave and stretch thing with Damian Lillard, made that last ditch effort to try and keep him, and he still ended up requesting a trade, but it worked out for them. Not as good as it could have, but now they're 20 million shy of the cap every single year because they've got Dame to pay off for the next 5 years. I don't know. It feels like one of those situations that's just, it's like, why not obviously try to get better, but when he requests a trade, just do it, because you're at any point going to get such a good return. Like, he's still in the prime years of his career. He'll probably be there for another 3 to 4 years. Like, it's wild to me. I just was pretty blown away by this whole thing.
Yeah, and if you look, I'm looking now at their free agency thing. I forget that they had Kyle Kuzma. He's still there off of the trade from last year.
That's your boy.
Yeah, it is my boy. You know what? I think, traded midseason, he went from a garbage team. I think it'll be fine. I think he'll bounce back this year. But they signed Kevin Porter Jr. to a 2-year deal. Bobby Portis got the 3-year extension. Taurean Prince on a 2-year deal. Jericho Sims on a 2-year deal. Gary Trent on a 2-year deal. And they also signed Gary Harris and obviously Miles Turner and Vasilije Micic. He was a trade via the Hornets.
Mm-hmm.
And then they lost Connaughton to the Hornets, obviously Dame and Brook Lopez. So it's like, you think about that as like, they can be competitive. They have some scrappy dudes, but there's no stars outside of Giannis. So it's a weird situation for them. They're definitely a huge loser just because of the fact that they've seen this window, this whole thing surrounding Giannis has been a topic for years. And they're like, oh, Giannis wants to leave. All right, they got Dame. Let's compete. They don't really compete. And now we're back in the same spot, only it's even worse. And they owe Dame money now. So it's a weird spot to be for the Bucks. So they're definitely a big loser. So let's talk about another loser. Who do you got for me, Ben?
The Los Angeles Lakers.
Hey.
So, it's nice to be able to put them in a loser category. Are they, a loser like the Kings? Well, anyway, we're not talking about the Kings. So LeBron, first of all, doesn't take the pay cut. And then he says, improve the roster or else. And
does that every time he's in a contract year, bro.
Yeah, I was just about to say this is such a LeBron move. The biggest move up until this morning was signing Jake LaRavia for $6 million.
Yep.
But now, with the most recent news coming out that they signed DeAndre Ayton to a 2-year deal, right? Mm-hmm. It's also a talking point that they're signing guys on 2-year deals. They're looking to sign guys on 2-year deals. They want to be as available and ready for 2027 free agency as possible. It's interesting. I think it's not a bad decision per se, but with Braun opting in, they are severely limited right now, and especially in attempting to build around Luka, because reality is you're not building around LeBron anymore.
Yep.
You can't. LeBron is, I'm not going to say washed, but LeBron is not the player that you build around if you want sustained success at this point. You got to build around Luka, but with how handy, how stuck they are with his money, that makes them a loser right now.
Yeah, and listen, from the LeBron James perspective, I don't blame him for taking the opting in, because that's been the story of his career. Was LeBron took pay cut after pay cut after pay cut throughout the course of his career, and he's made more money for the NBA than arguably any player that's ever done it, right? So I think that it's fair for LeBron to say, hey, when I'm older, if they're giving me the opportunity to cash in, I'm going to cash in before I leave, before it's all said and done. And listen, does this give them less flexibility? Sure. Is a starting five for them going to be exciting on offense and awful on defense? Yes. It's going to be the Lake show offensively and a crap show defensively. So it'll be interesting to see how all that works. Dorian Finney-Smith, there was the reason for his departure was rumored that Rob Pelinka was talking poorly on his health and trying to scare teams away and tank his value. And that ultimately led in him leaving for Houston, which was weird because, Luka and Dorian Finney-Smith are very good friends from their time in Dallas and their time making it to the finals together. Like you're getting rid of a guy who works with your best player right now. So it is definitely the Lakers just doing things that just don't make sense. Pelinka is the most interesting GM in the league in terms of like moves that actually work and make sense. That's never been really a thing of his. So the Lakers are in a weird spot. They're not much better. They're going to be competitive so long as everything goes their way, and if all the shots are falling on any given night, great. But their defense is going to be suspect, and it's going to be questionable. They literally waited until today to get a center when that was all the talk was like, get LeBron and Luka as center, get LeBron and Luka as center, and you're watching all these different guys choose different places too. By mind you, like they had the opportunity to go play with LeBron and Luka and chose not to. So this was definitely an interesting development for the Lakers. So is it like a terrible offseason? No, but you were on the last 2 years, potentially, maybe even the last year of LeBron James and this tenure. And if this is how you're going to go out, it's definitely going to go out with more of a whimper than a bang.
Yeah, well, and they didn't get better for sure. I'm gonna close the Laker conversation with a question to you. What do you think are the odds that LeBron gets traded? And if he does, do you think it's in the offseason, or do you think it's, before the trade deadline of this year?
I think what makes this hard is that he did opt in. So the only way, I don't even think, I think if you asked me, if the question was, is he more likely to get traded? I don't think he's actually going to get traded. I think if he were to go elsewhere, he would need to get bought out by the Lakers, that's definitely a possibility. They can, the Lakers, Rich Paul could probably, grab him by the balls a little bit and say, hey, you're going to buy my guy out so he can go wherever the heck he wants to finish his career. And that could be midway through the season too. And, that possibility exists. And I actually don't think it's that crazy to think that if the Lakers suck next year or don't perform up to standards, that LeBron might say, like, this is my last year. I'm going to try and do what I can and go to the team who's most successful right now on a cheaper deal to finish the year. And I don't think the idea would be like, oh, if LeBron's available, there's going to be this bidding war. LeBron's not going to leave without already knowing where he's going next. So it'll just be reported like the next day, like, oh, here he goes. He's already made his decision. I don't think he's going to wait it out any more than he should if he were to leave. I think it's possible. I would say like there's a 15% chance that happens, but I don't think it will. I think, LeBron's never been that kind of guy to just like mid-season, I should say, to like, cause that kind of drama that forces his way out type of guy, like a Jimmy Butler type of thing. I think LeBron might be upset and that might just be it. But I mean, the Lakers have done a lot of stuff for LeBron too. Your son wasn't going to be drafted at all without you, pulling some strings. So then they signed him to a full, 4-year deal. So it's like, hey, we did a little bit of stuff for you. So you got us the chip. We got you your son. Like, I think we're kind of on an even playing field right now. So that's just kind of how I view it.
That's fair. All right. Take us to our last loser.
So our last loser that we have is going to be the Indiana Pacers. Now, obviously, we just talked about Miles Turner signing to the rival Bucks. I think when we talk about, you know, where the Pacers were at, one win away from the finals, your star player gets hurt, and you understood that this year was going to be kind of an interesting season. There, would you guys be able to compete? Are you going to be able to run back the roster? Now, there was reports when the reason Miles Turner even decided to go to the Bucks or wanted to go to the Bucks in the first place was that the Pacers lowballed him. The Pacers gave him a below market option. And when you're watching Naz Reid, who's a bench player, make 5 years, 125 million, and you were the starting center on a finals team, I think it's something where he went to the contracts and said, "Hey, why is this guy making more than me when I can do the things that he can do?" Kind of in a way, right? So now you lose Miles Turner to your rival, and arguably it's been the biggest rivalry in the NBA over the past couple of years, at least in terms of intensity and gameplay. So you lost in the finals by one game. You get to watch one of your main pieces and a homegrown talent go play for your rivals now. Your star point guard's not back next year. This year's just going to be a year of, okay, let's see the Benedict Mathurin show. It's going to be on him. How does Obi Toppin look? Like, can we get some of these young guys in there and see who we can, build around, or who do we need to move around to make this team better? So to go from the doorstep of a championship to where they're at right now, it's hard not to see them as a loser.
It's tough. I I really do feel for the Pacers, especially Pacers fans, because you're on the highest of highs after Game 6. You feel like obviously you're one win away from winning the championship, in a spot where so many times you felt like, in this playoff run, things were over, games were over, series were over, right? And then 7 minutes into Game 7, you're wishing the series did end in Game 6, right? This whole thing was a mess, and I really do feel for the Pacers, but there's also something about the Pacers lowballing Miles Turner that makes me feel less bad about the Pacers being in this situation, because for 20 years now, they haven't paid the luxury tax. They haven't dipped into the luxury tax once. And obviously, if they would have gone above 23 million, which was the reported offer to Miles Turner that he rejected, and obviously took 27 in Milwaukee, if they paid him more than the 23, that would have put them in the luxury tax. So it begs the question of, did you not pay him because you wanted to stay outside the luxury tax? Does that make sense? Well, in some ways, yes, because you're not going to be a contender. You're, at best probably going to be a bottom level playoff team, right?
Right.
You could be pushing play in because your star franchise player is sitting in a wheelchair all next year. So it's tough, but in a lot of ways, I look at that Miles Turner situation, and I'm thinking to myself, like, right now you're a loser, but there's every reason at the trade deadline, there's every reason next offseason for them to reload, get the pieces they need to, and move forward with, essentially the same core. And I think that they could get back to, a similar contention status. But right now, it's pretty easy for me to pick them as a loser, because they got a lot worse, and they don't have a lot going for them outside of like next year. So
yeah, absolutely. So it's, this is a tough situation for Indy. And, listen, if we didn't get to your team today because we're wrapping up here, it's definitely, there's definitely a lot more, good moves that are around the league. I think if we wanted to touch up on just a few final ones before we head out here, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander signed the largest, per year contract in NBA history, 4-year, $285 million extension. So that's $78 million a year.
holy crap.
Insane. But he's the MVP. Won a championship, won finals MVP. I think it's well deserved. And we can talk about what that means for the future of OKC another time, because next year that won't matter yet. So they're going to be in a good spot. And then on the other side, Jaren Jackson Jr. got his max deal with the Grizzlies, a 5-year, $240 million deal, which that one, you like, I think the argument's like, oh, that's the going rate for a max contract. But then, on the outside, you're like, dang, they paid Jaren Jackson Jr. that much
Hey,
money. So
yeah.
it's like, um, definitely an interesting one. And then the one I want your opinion on, the Knicks signing Mike Brown as their head coach. What do we think of that?
I'm so happy for Mike, man. I think it's a really good move for New York. I think it's a good situation for Mike Brown. I'm excited to see how he comes in and utilizes his bench. So I'm hyped for him. I'm happy for him. Obviously he's still getting a paycheck and a half from the Sacramento Kings too. So that dude is gonna be doing just fine living out there in New York.
Yeah, I think the perfect situation for him in terms of he's not afraid of the moment. He's not afraid of the lights of New York.
No.
He gets to make his presence felt there. I think New York fans are going to love him. The only thing that'll be questionable is be wary of what your starting five looks like to start the season, because it's not going to change much once that happens. So, Mike Brown sticks with his guys. So, if you're looking for flexibility throughout your lineup, you're going to have to be a little bit patient while he figures your guys out. But you're getting a
There's
damn
probably
good coach.
And
So
there's probably going to be times too where he shelves a random player for like 4 games and then plays him for like 48 minutes. And then you're like, what the hell?
so enjoy them while you have them. New York, it's definitely, I wouldn't say an upgrade, but I don't think it's so much of a downgrade from Thibodeau where you're like, oh man, we're screwed. I think given some
Yeah,
of the
it's pretty
options they were,
lateral.
yeah, exactly, from the options they were talking about, from reaching out to active coaches was weird. Like that whole saga to end on a coach that you probably just should have ended on in the first place. At least they got that over with, so they get to focus on building around Mike and that team. And Mike he's inherited a good team. They're a team that can compete in the East. They're a team that, as constructed now, can compete for a final spot if everything goes the way that it works for them. Mike can create a good system for them.
100%. So I do have one final little thing. And this is for a tweet from Matt George. Obviously Matt George works for ABC 10. He's a Locked On Kings podcast guy, and I will say he has nailed everything so far with the Kings in its offseason. And his just now report was the Sacramento Kings have remained open to a sign and trade of Malik Monk to Detroit. They still have a few days to complete that. Meanwhile, the Kings are very engaged on the Jonathan Kuminga front in a deal which I'm told would likely not involve Monk.
Oh, so maybe a DeRozan, maybe even Levine. That'd be cool.
This gets interesting.
That
So
would be cool if it's not.
This is something to keep an eye on. Obviously, if something happens, we'll talk about it next week. But yeah, this is a crazy offseason already just around the NBA.
Yeah, so we'll definitely see what happens. But like Ben said, we will keep an eye on these things and definitely report to it as soon as we can. Maybe it's next week if something crazy happens, like a Kuminga signing. Maybe we'll do a quick little thing on it. But outside of that, I think this is a good episode. We got a lot of stuff to break down this week, but we'll see what happens with the rest of free agency, and we're definitely going to make our NBA picks for the season as the season gets closer. But now it's time to focus on Summer League. We get to see a lot of our boys next week. Play, California Classic's going to happen. We're not in it, but we'll still be in the Vegas Summer League. We got games coming up. It's going to be great. I think our first matchup is against the Magic, which will be cool, watching, Neek, Devin, and Maxime go up against, Chase Richardson and stuff. It's going to be fun. Like, I think Summer League this year's got some ballers, so it's going to be a lot of fun this year. I'm excited for that. All right. So any final thoughts before we head out here, brother?
No, sir. Ready to go.
All right, guys, this was episode 94 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. For all you guys watching on video, all of our links to our socials are up above. For all you audio listeners out there, the links to descriptions are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, review, and follow the show. We appreciate all the love and support as we grow each and every week with you guys. With that being said, I am Marcos. Conan Negron beside me here as always is
Ben the Jet Reds.
All right, y'all. We love y'all. We will talk to you next week. Peace.